advocate. Maybe when buying or selling a property abroad or opening a bank account. Contact Marie to discuss your options on 482 088, and there's no VAT to pay.
Firestone Rubber Roof Shop for one-piece flat roofing systems. No joins, no leaks. We also line commercial box gutters in one piece up to 60 metres with a 20-year written warranty against leakage. Call Rubber Roof Shop on 496667.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
There were no new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. We now have 6 active cases in the community. 250 people waiting for the result of a test and 329 booked in for a test today. The vaccination board is showing 61,312 first doses have been administered, 28,412 second doses. There are 1,952 people booked in for a jab over the next 7 days. And the Department of Health and Social Care currently holding 13,402 shots of vaccine in stock at the moment. You're on the Mannin Line with Manx Radio and the Treasury Minister, Alfred Cannan, with us today. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Andy.
Well, lots and lots on your plate. And just get to the bottom of this, just could you explain in words of one syllable the 400 million?
Yeah, with pleasure. We are going to propose to Tynwald that we go to the market at this point for £400 million of a debt issue. Let me just explain, though, this is not new money. This is not a wild speculative investment that is taking place. This has very solid foundations. The solid foundations are based on the steam packets need for £160 million. 80 million of which is for a new ship and 80 million of which is to pay back the government investment in the company when we purchased it, and 180 million pounds is related to Manx Utilities' existing debt, which is already sitting on the government's balance sheet. So the vast majority of this is either existing or is needed in the immediate future, and our assessment is that we should go now to the market to raise this debt whilst the interest rates remain favourable.
If you want to get in touch with Mr. Cannan, we've got lots of messages coming in already, text, email or call. And this time last year, it seems a lifetime ago, you talked and you mentioned something not many people thought about, and that was tourism infrastructure, hospitality infrastructure. You talked about needing to keep the hospitality sector intact. That means hotels, everything down to glamping pods as well. How far are you along that? Are we certain that we're going to come out of this with that hospitality sector intact?
So, Andy, last year when we set up the Economic Recovery Group, following the initial stages, the crisis stages, if you like, of the pandemic, we set out with 3 key objectives: to protect jobs, to stabilise the economy, and to direct investment into our future. And overall, I think we are absolutely delivering on those commitments. I can tell you that today I checked the latest unemployment figures. They have dropped below the unofficial figures, as yet sort of unaudited, if you like, are below 600, which I think is a remarkable achievement, given at the start of this pandemic we were being forecast that unemployment could possibly run into the thousands. So we have set out and we have achieved, I think, to a large degree at this particular point, that major goal. We've stabilised the economy and we are continuing to look at investment opportunities for the future. So far, we have put in 200, the cost to the taxpayer so far of stabilising the economy has effectively been £250 million, £130 million of direct targeted investment now into sectors that in our domestic economy particularly that have needed it. And when it comes to tourism, we made a clear commitment at the beginning, or adopted a clear strategic view, that if we did not protect the infrastructure, the hotel and accommodation sector specifically, we would not be able to welcome visitors back to our shores when the time came to open up.
They're meeting in Cornwall. The G7 are going to be meeting very shortly, and certainly the subject of 010 is coming up all the time as well. What's the Treasury's view on this? Was this always going to come, or was it a bolt out of the blue?
No, I think there has been a lot of discussion around this particular issue, whether that be multinational taxation for the likes of Google and Facebook and others, or whether that be minimum rates of corporate tax. So it's not been a bolt out of the blue, but perhaps the agenda is moving at a slightly quicker pace than we anticipated. Throughout these discussions, which have been going on for a long time about taxation, the appropriateness of taxation, who should pay. The government has consistently adopted the latest international standards, particularly around crime, anti-money laundering, but also the latest set of standards around base erosion profit shifting. We exchange information with a significant number of countries around the world about taxation status of companies that are on the Isle of Man with other home bases. So we are already committed to the agenda on this. This is another development. What we are saying at the moment is that we do now need to understand the detail around this, and there is quite a lot of detail to be added. So they've got really two key pillars. As I said, the first pillar is the international taxation of Facebook's and Google's, the big, large global multinationals, and the second is the country rate. And I think there's quite a lot of discussion still to be had around understanding where that benchmark is going to be set, what sort of level in terms of who it's going to apply to from a corporate perspective, and also what carve-outs potentially are going to sit beneath that. So we will work closely now with our international partners to understand all this and then to adjust and react accordingly. And of course, alongside this, in any case, Andy, a few months ago, in fact, last year, our Economic Recovery Group determined that the island should seek a new economic strategy. I think the timing is very, very good for that. That work is ongoing at the moment, and we certainly hope to deliver the first phase of that work by the autumn of this year.
The person in the street on the Isle of Man never knew what was going on behind the scenes from 1984 or back into the 60s, when the Isle of Man's economy was, when the 1960 census was down to 40,000+. And we adopted a strategy of attracting high net worth individuals, then going into the finance sector on the Isle of Man. So behind the scenes, the person on the street doesn't know what's happening. They just know that the standard of living on the Isle of Man has done nothing but go up for 40 years. So obviously you're talking in very technical terms for most people. And so the nub of it would be, are we under threat? Are we under any more threat than we were before? Or is this just another kind of worldwide sweep?
I think it'd be wrong to say then there may not be implications for the Isle of Man from this. But by the same token, always in these scenarios, there tend to emerge opportunities as well. So, and I think the other point to consider, Andy, is that the island's industries and businesses have considerable substance to them now. I think we've gone past the stage of panicking every time the international nations come up with a new initiative or somebody starts to focus on the Isle of Man. We've moved the agenda on significantly. We are considerably involved in understanding and involved in the negotiations around these matters. We are involved. Our assessor of income tax regularly meets and discusses matters, not only with counterparts in HM Treasury and across our near neighbours, but also with the OECD in Europe directly. So we have strong lines of communication. We are always moving to assess matters. And as I said, alongside that, we are currently reviewing our economic strategy anyway. And it may be, of course, that some form of corporate taxation may play a role in the future. Of course, then understanding that and its impact on the island will be the next stage for us to deliver.
Okay, Andrew's with us on the Mannin line today. Hello, Andrew. You're live with the Treasury Minister, Alfred Cannan.
Oh, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon. It was reported in the papers at the weekend that a Microsoft subsidiary based in Ireland made a £222 billion profit last year and paid no corporation tax, which seems very, very unfair. I was wondering how many companies, if any, are registered in the Isle of Man in a similar way in order to avoid paying corporation tax?
Well, my understanding, if you're talking about the big global multinationals, which is really the subject of one part of this whole discussion with G7, G20 and Europe, is very few companies of this nature are based in the Isle of Man from our assessment. Clearly, I can't go into detail about individual tax situation, but my understanding, Andrew, is that we actually have very little in the way of Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Amazon subsidiaries based on the island.
Andrew,
There are some, presumably.
Again, I mean, I don't have that level of detail. I think we've already had a look at this potentially from an impact perspective, and we think this vision of taxing the big multinational global corporates will have a minor impact potentially, if any, on the Isle of Man's position.
Andrew, what's your view of that situation in Ireland?
Well, it seems grossly unfair. I live here, but I have a small company in the UK, and I pay corporation tax. I pay more corporation tax than Microsoft. It seems absolutely, totally unfair.
Well, okay. Thanks, Andrew, for that. That's an interesting point. That multinationals, as you say, Mr. Cannan, this is basically because the big multinationals, nobody knows quite where they are. Tax is only payable where the server is, so they could be Kazakhstan, they could be Latvia,
absolutely.
they could be anywhere.
This is a global problem, and it has to be addressed. There's absolutely no. I don't think anybody's got any issue with addressing and tackling the core fundamental underlying problems of these big corporations.
And they're eye-watering sums.
Avoiding their taxation.
Yeah.
They are eye-watering sums, and they should pay their rightful dues. The question of, obviously, where it gets complicated is where should those dues be paid, and on what basis is the calculation made? And of course, there is a risk with all these sorts of actions that actually there's an underlying agenda. And for example, all that happens is the big corporates, actually, these multinationals just simply end up staying in the US and no other developing or emerging nations or other nations get the benefit of some of their headquartered or subsidiary business. And I think these are the things that need to be worked on when agreeing to the headline strategy.
Okay, Ewan, you're live with Alfred Cannan.
Afternoon, Andy. Afternoon, Alf. How are you?
Good afternoon, Ewan. Very well, thank you.
Right. A couple of questions, really. Like Andy, you said before there, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, the average man on the street, it goes over their head, a lot of that stuff with the G7 and everything. But looking at the world figures at the moment, I mean, the US have just announced $28 trillion in debt to China, the highest debt since World War II. The Deutsche Bank are warning of hyperinflation. We've got a bit of stealth taxing started here on the island. With also a trend seems to be a world trend of universal basic income and state dependency. So I'm just wondering, what teeth has the Isle of Man actually got in comparison to answering to the UK? Are we standalone here, or are you going by the UK narrative and you have to do what you're told?
Well, we negotiate with our partners. Clearly, the UK plays a significant role in determining and expressing views relating to the offshore to the Crown dependencies and indeed to the overseas territories, and our views are expressed. We will often work together with our partners in terms of Jersey and Guernsey in the Channel Islands to determine a unified strategy when approaching some of these matters where that is in the best interest. And of course, we will also align ourselves where we think there are other countries who may have a similar view on matters. So, for example, as these talks progress, one will expect to see countries like Ireland, for example, who currently have a lower corporate tax rate than the one that is being suggested, may well have quite significant objections, and those objections will have to be overcome. And as I said, I don't think that small developing countries and even the lesser nations are necessarily going to want to hand over their economic strategies and corporation tax levels over to the G7 or to the G20 without some significant sovereignty being maintained over how they set tax rates, and particularly tax rates that may be applicable in certain circumstances. So I do think that we do have a say. Yes, it's difficult. We're a very small nation. Clearly, there is a number of bigger nations who have a negative view of the island's taxation position. But nevertheless, when the analysis comes, when people come to examine what the island's done, they can actually rarely find significant fault in terms of the position that we're adopted and the standards that we apply to our industries.
Now, what? In a layman's question to you, we're talking now it's 400 million, and am I right in 250 million that you announced a few months ago that you'd already borrowed?
No, I announced during last year when we put together our sort of response to the crisis. I did seek TIMOD approval at the time to effectively have an overdraft of £250 million if we needed it, and that was put in there just as a safety net, as a comfort blanket if the crisis came again at sort of the depth and levels that we had experienced in sort of March, April, May. We haven't used that money. That money is still sat there, but nevertheless, this pandemic has had many twists and turns, and what I need to do is to make sure that if we need access to cash and there's a crisis or an emergency, that there is absolutely no question that the government has that cash to hand.
And my concern would be that the money is getting spent wisely, because there seems to be a massive overspend on different things at the moment. We're talking like large figures going out on overspends, and it seems to me that there seems to be a lack of governing on expenditures on certain capital projects.
In particular, what, Ewan?
Well, the steam packet, for one, is the obvious one that comes up with, and then we have some other stuff on the agendas now, which is coming up, like money for bike lanes and refurbishing railway tracks and stuff. And I just feel that we're in a bit of a crisis situation. Like I say, I think we're going to have hyperinflation. We've got a lot of problems coming through down the pipeline. Products, everyone's suffering for products coming down through. Prices are going to go through the roof on everything. And I just feel that money needs to be spent wisely on the island. What we have needs to be spent a lot more wisely and not be dissipated off into silly things. Okay,
all right. So inflation or crisis?
Well, I think if I take Ewan's key point, absolutely this will be a big concern from the public. Given some of the project problems that have happened with some of the big investment capital schemes that government's undertaken in the last few years, and indeed historically, that money is invested properly. The 400 million, which is, as I said, Ewan, is already pretty much either in existence or about to be in existence when the steam packet come to buy the new ship and pay back government the 80 million. That money is set aside for capital infrastructure investment in the longer term. It is set aside for meeting commitments around climate change. It is set aside for health infrastructure and other infrastructure as a new government would see fit. But, the reason why we need to do it now is perhaps for the reasons that you've suggested. We can all read the press. We recognise the huge uncertainty and one has to make a considered decision in doing this. As I said, it is effectively readjusting some of the existing debt and debt that is about to be incurred. But in doing so, does one move whilst there is some relative stability particularly around interest rates in the debt market? And I think when that is considered, when you think of the challenges in front, then it is a sensible move. Your point is absolutely valid. There has to be a properly thought out and considered programme of capital infrastructure investment. And one of the things that we've done to try and bring that into a better place is create a major projects unit, put in a proper board structure, and that is one of our commitments. That's currently in formation, and that will be ready to go with the next government.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. Thanks for calling. Here's Howard with us on the Mannin line. Howard, you're live with Mr. Cannan.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. I don't know whether I've just gone into the other room when you were talking about infrastructure, etc. So you may have already answered the question I was going to ask. In your 400 million borrowings that you're going to take on, I've heard stories of it going to be ring-fenced, especially for the utilities. Now, will a large percentage of that money that's being ring-fenced for the utilities go towards paying off the enormous debt that the power station, the building, the power station operations created? Plus, now you say infrastructure for the future. We have the steam packet under national control. We have the utility under national control. Will some of this money be used in the future to purchase the rights of the Manx gas? Because there seem to be no end of bother and delays within the government Manx gas talks. And is there a future in the Isle of Man government taking over Manx gas?
Right, so to answer the last question first, there are no plans for government to get involved by purchasing gas infrastructure in any capacity as it currently stands. I want to, Howard, just talk about the 185 million. So just to be absolutely clear with you, and I realise these things can be sometimes appear rather confusing or complex. That £185 million already exists as a debt. So the Manx Utilities Authority owe the Treasury £185 million, which is money that they have spent over a significant number of years on things like sewerage infrastructure, sewerage treatment works, pumping stations, other investments that they've done, such as flood alleviation works and other minor capital and infrastructure projects. So they have this 178 million or 180 million sat with Treasury already. And what we are simply doing is we are putting that debt into the market at what we expect to be almost exactly the same interest rate as we are charging the Manx Utilities Authority. And we are effectively, that money will go into government reserves for capital infrastructure investment in the future. The MUA will not get £180 million. I hope that explains that situation to you.
Yeah, because it looked like a very dangerous situation where a huge pot of money is heading your direction, and people waving arms would spend it willy-nilly. And that was the fear, that there was already a serious debt within Manx Utilities, not only the power stations, but we're talking about water and sewage, etc., that that money would disappear.
Yeah, so Howard, just to interrupt you there. So if you went to study the Manx Utilities balance sheet, you would see this already there. This is not new money. This is simply, effectively, what we're saying is we'll take that debt, we will convert that into investment for the future, and the Manx Utilities will continue to pay that down under the current structure, within the current financial framework. And what will happen is with the 400 million, it'll be actually 320 that comes to government, that will go into our reserves. So our reserves, I expect our reserves to reflect about £2 billion if this transaction is completed. On the flip side, we will have this 400 million, of which the MUA will continue to pay in and the steam packet will pay in.
Okay, all right.
Well, when Andy, please, just for a second, when the government, and I agree with the fact that the government did take the steam packet under its wing, but there was the promise of a new boat, which we're getting, but there was also a £79 million debt that the steam packet were going to pay back to government, and that was asked for within X number of months, a year, 18 months. Has that been paid back, or will this come under the same 400 million that will go into the various financial companies in the steam packet, etc.?
Well, it will only go into one company, but yes, absolutely, Howard. That £80 million, which effectively we incorporated as part of the purchase for the steam packet, is being put back into the Treasury coffers. So it is part of the deal. They will repay us £80 million, and they will take £80 million for their new ship, which they will then start to repay back into this fund. So in total, they will repay £160 million back into government.
Yeah.
I hope that explains it.
It does. It's a complicated situation. I can appreciate that you're borrowing money at the present time when the rate is extremely cheap. But it worries me that there's such a serious debt building up, and now we're leading into a change of government. Will this all come to fruition after the coming election, or will it be incorporated very soon?
Well, I think it needs to happen because the steam packet now need the assurance that the money is coming. They have debt scheduled to meet with the building of the new ship. The new ship is currently being built, as most people are aware. The Manxman is being built. They need to make that commitment and meet the commitments. So I think from that perspective that will happen anyway. But this whole project is expected to probably take place before if approved by Tynwald, would take place before the new government actually sits down.
Okay, thanks, Howard.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Thank you, Minister.
That's a pleasure, Howard.
All right, thanks. It's 27 minutes before 1. A question for Mr. Cannan, and we'll have the break to think about it.
Good afternoon, Treasury Minister. My name is Nigel Sperring from Albany House Bed and Breakfast in Peel. Just like to know that obviously the Chief Minister advised all companies and accommodation providers to start managing their own business, which is correct, and that's what we've done. We've actually spent a lot of money on advertising to get business back into the Isle of Man to come and stay with us through the summer, and July looks really, really promising, and they're coming in from the 2nd of July. Now, if these borders are not open from the beginning of July and the date is moved, which is fine, these guests are obviously going to cancel. Please can you advise me that in our situation we're going to lose another month, so that we're not going to be just given that £17 per night, which is what we got on lockdown. We'll be getting normal rack rate for the people that have cancelled, because obviously it's the height of our season, and I think we need to be subsidised much better than we have been through lockdown. So if you could have a look at that for me and give me some advice on that, please. Thank you very much.
Next time you're in Sulby, pop into the Ginger Hall.
Join the boys for our fine ales and continental lagers, and catch the sport on TV.
Meet the girls for food and enjoy our fine selection of wine and gins.
There's live music every weekend with a Celtic music jam session every third Sunday.
Or host your event in our 100-person capacity marquee.
The Ginger Hall has it all. Find us on Facebook.
Or pop in.
Saturday, June the 26th is Armed Forces Day, so join us at the Villa Marina Gardens to say thank you to all our services personnel, past and present, with free family entertainment from 1 till 5 in the gardens, evening entertainment from 5 through till 10:30 inside the villa, with live music and dancing, including the amazing Lava. Check the Armed Forces Day Isle of Man Facebook page for all the details. Armed Forces Day, June the 26th. Show your support and salute our armed forces. Athol Garage in Ballasalla is more than a Nissan authorised repair centre. Their team of highly factory-trained and experienced technicians will service and repair any make and model, with dedicated aftercare too. With Athol, you get a competitive fixed-price menu and a courtesy car if needed. Pity this driver didn't know that.
Oh, great! I told you to go to Athol!
Athol, a garage to swear by, not swear at. Book now at athol.im or call the 18 820082.
B&B's fantastic summer sale starts this weekend. Make it a sensational summer with up to 25% off throughout the store. Beautiful sofas and suites, stunning kitchens, gorgeous beds and bedroom ranges from leading brands. With up to 3 years interest-free credit on purchases over £500, with the option of nothing to repay for 3 months. B&B Furniture's fantastic summer sale starts this Saturday at Snugborough Trading Estate, open 10 till 4.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And live, it's Alfred Cannan, MHK, Aaron Michael, and Treasury Minister, of course. Now, Nigel dropped us that message beforehand.
Yes, so I realise there's a lot of people with their eyes on what is going to happen on the 28th of June. I think what I would say to Nigel, if there was a slip back or for some reason the borders were not able to open as currently planned, then we would continue to pay support. Now, Nigel's asked, would that support be increased? What I would say is that, were that decision to be made, then the Economic Recovery Group would be immediately meeting to determine what was appropriate in those circumstances.
I mean, how do Comin view the end of this month? Optimistic?
I think one wants to be optimistic. There's a lot of data coming in. I think, Andy, I think from a council of ministers perspective, we've got a huge amount to consider. Everybody recognises and understands this Delta variant or the India variant is causing high levels of cases. On the very flip side to that, there is no evidence yet emerging that there is any increase in hospitalisations or deaths. And as an island, we're facing the decisions about how we make progress, when we make progress, and under what circumstances. So a lot to consider in the next few days for the Chief Minister, the Health Minister, and the Council of Ministers, as indeed there is for Tynwald. And I can say that we have extended those conversations out to Tynwald members and are trying to give them as much information and evidence as well. But that decision will be made in the next few days, and I'm sure that the Chief Minister at some point will confirm when he expects to make an announcement.
Okay, 15 weeks tomorrow. It's the Keys general election, September 23rd, and every day on the Mannin line you're hearing candidates. Today, Lib Van candidate for Ramsey, Laurie Hooper, will be on later on in Mannin line. Right now, Andrew's with us live on Mannin line. You're live with Alfred Cannan, Andrew.
Hello, Mr. Cannan. It's Andrew Bentley, the Douglas Council member for Derby Ward. I think we've met on one occasion. I think you'll be aware in the news recently that the family library, which is located within my ward, is having funding issues. Are you aware of this?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yes, the family library. I was there on Saturday, had a tour with my fellow councillors, Watson and Hamer, and absolutely beautiful facility. The staff, very passionate, and they provide some great services around the island through not only the family library based in Douglas, but also the mobile library, which goes around many of the most isolated communities, people who are housebound, care homes, and some of the schools. And obviously they have this problem with funding. What I'd like to know is, I believe that there is a committee report that has been completed, and your colleague, Mr. Quayle, has that report. What will be happening on that? Because that report, I believe, is on the future of libraries in the Isle of Man. Secondly, I'd like to know what's going to happen. Is there any way that any short-term funding can be made available for the short-term survival of this library? And thirdly, can we have a proper consideration of how library funding happens in the Isle of Man? Because this service is well used by potentially 2,000 people across the island. It serves many of the most vulnerable and isolated people in the island, and generally serves people at the older and younger end of society. And it would be a shame to lose what is a wonderful thing.
So, Andrew, thank you very much. So, firstly, just with the mobile library, you may or may not be aware that Treasury actually has stepped in to support the funding for this valuable resource for the last few years. And I think from my recollection, we've done that on a match funding basis in relation to charitable donation that has been received from one particular family. So we have been actively involved in that. I'm a little bit out of date on the current situation, but I do recognise that a Tynwald committee has looked at this matter, and indeed I heard Claire Barber, MHK, this morning call for that report to be released. That report is with the Council of Ministers. I expect that to be on the agenda for the next Council of Ministers meeting, and I will absolutely be looking to try and get that report released, because it does discuss the future of libraries and their place within the community. As you will recognise, it sort of fits in with a lot of other issues that are being impacted as a result of digitalisation. And of course, people have easy access to many of the books and information that they would normally traditionally have gone to get from their libraries. They can obviously get that from their laptops or Kindle or whatever type of technical device that they are using at the current time. The whole matter does require understanding. It does require some form of strategy. I think that really relies in terms of looking at this report, and I think the sooner we can get that out and get that under discussion, the better. Okay. But we have had no request at the moment for additional funding, and were one to come in, then clearly we would take a look at it.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for calling. A note in from Alistair just said, could you raise the subject of 010 and the fact that President Biden does nothing about Delaware? Why should we have to suffer if President Biden isn't prepared to put his own house in order? New readers start here. Delaware is famous for being a low-tax jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think Delaware is really all about secrecy. Certainly, I mean, it's long been an issue that's been raised to sort of counteract other measures that have been brought in globally. I think from my perspective, from the island's perspective, it's certainly something that still needs addressing. But we need to move with the international agenda. Delaware as a competitor is not really in our minds and thoughts, and I think we've made a huge amount of progress in the last decade, particularly, and we need to keep on working with international partners to both be involved, but also to make sure that we have ourselves the highest standards when it comes to declaration, beneficial ownership, substance, and all the rest of the matters that we've complied with.
So we can't really say, well, what about them? What about Monaco? What about the Netherlands? What about Ireland? What about the Caribbean? We can't point to other people. We have to plough our own furrow.
We will work to make sure that the playing field that we are working in is a level playing field to the very best of our ability. And of course, a lot of these countries and small jurisdictions have their own issues, and in not complying will find themselves subject to sanctions. But we will work to the best of our ability to make sure that the island, from a competitive perspective, is operating on a level playing field, and that, to a large degree, is a big focus.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but Jed's with us on Mannin Line. You're live with Mr. Cannan, Jed.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Cannan, for coming on the airwaves. It's a bit of a fantasy question. I hope you're going to enjoy this one. Just imagine you were given £100 million and you yourself were charged with sharing out into the economy in ways that would create jobs and prosperity. What sort of direction would you push that money to?
Jed, I think one has to make sure that you are properly investing both in current infrastructure, but also looking to invest in the future. And I think that one would make sure that one was investing predominantly, ensuring that the island's skills, the education was properly attuned to that, and that companies were being given relevant support to adapt. And in actual fact, we're doing a lot of that anyway as part of our economic recovery plans.
Okay, thank you, Jed. Interesting question. And Tony's with us. Hello, Tony. You're live with Alfred Cannan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, Tony.
I hope you're both keeping well.
Thank you.
My question isn't related to G7, G8 or any of the other G20s. It's related to the fact that nobody in the last 10, 12 years in government seems to have addressed the biggest issue we have, which is pensions for public sectors which are grossly under... We don't have enough money to pay it. Is there going to be some plan so that we don't keep borrowing money to fix things?
Well, thank you very much, Tony. This still remains very much a live issue as far as the government is concerned, and there have been some quite major changes in terms of employee contributions in particular that have come into pensions. So that has somewhat slowed down the run rate in terms of liabilities that have been put together. And also, at the beginning of this administration, we made a very clear commitment to ensure that the sustainability of pensions was factored into our thinking. And in fact, we organised a 5-year financial plan that sought to fill this black hole, if you like, by ensuring that departments properly accounted for their expenditure, and by the end of this administration, that effectively we had filled what we regarded as a £50 million black hole. So there has been progress made. That is not to say that there is not progress to be made. One of the steps forward, I think, in that respect, is that Tynwald voted on, and we will shortly introduce a voluntary defined contribution scheme. Rather than a defined benefit scheme. I think that will be another step forward. It'll be interesting to see how many members of staff, new joiners, actually determined to take that. But it is a subject that will require continued analysis and continued work.
Will you ever get to the end of it? Do you think is there a timetable on when it'll be resolved?
Well, I think there is a cost associated with these with pensions. There is an assessment in which there is a review period of the overall cost, and then there are, if that cost has exceeded the thresholds, then certain implications then are applied to the employee's contribution. They can either pay more or they can accept less at contributions at the end of their term. And similarly, government will have to review the cost in terms of the input from the taxpayer. So there are measures in place now. There has been a lot of work done around pensions. I have no doubt there will be more to do, but when that next analysis takes place of the pensions cost and the outcome of that in terms of what is required for the future takes place, then that will be a major staging point, I think, to understand whether these reforms have worked or whether there is going to be a requirement for a future change of direction.
All right, Tony, thanks for that question. Just a final few ones. We've just got a couple of minutes now. Obviously, you're standing in Aaron Michael, Mr. Baker, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Wetherall are also standing as well. And you'll know what question's coming. Mr. Gelling, Mr. Corkill and Mr. Bell were all Treasury Minister before they became Chief Minister. Will you be throwing your hat in the ring to become Chief Minister?
So, Andy, I have made two commitments. First of all, is to see the end of my job as the Treasury Minister right through to its bitter end. We set out our commitments to stabilise this economy, protect jobs, and that piece of work is going to have to go right down to the wire. And then the second commitment I have made is to work with my constituents in terms of both understanding what their views are for the future, but also asking them for their vote. And on the basis that would be a preliminary requirement for anybody, and that really anybody's focus should be about delivering for their constituents and for the island. You know, that will be my focus.
Mr. Cannan, everybody knows you're in the front running. Everybody knows you're one of the most experienced ministers. You know all about Treasury. You know the funds of the Isle of Man. You know what hand needs to be on the tiller. Would you accept the job if your colleague suggested it?
I think I will make it clear when asking for people's votes that part of my commitment would be to do what would be in the best interests of the island from a service level, and in terms of were my constituents to consider giving me their vote again.
Okay, Mr. Cannan, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Don't miss this